Another Mike Oldfield Discography podcast. Waiting for the storm here in Berlin while we talk about the songs of Distant Earth. Okay. Mike's album from 1994. And we mentioned, or you mentioned last year that Tubular Bells 2 was a turning point in his career. I think in certain ways that became most obvious with this album, actually. Tubular Bells 2 still had semblances of his old work in it very clearly. And the new one is clearly in an even more electronic direction. Therefore, I think, at least at the surface, even more visibly or more audibly a turning point.
Yeah, it's not only about that. It really is where Mike has dropped most of what made his pieces when it was using counterpoint and lots of different parts interacting. Let's say like always more than three. Let's say.
Yes.
and here with this album, Songs of Distant Earth, or the Songs of Distant Earth, I guess. You know, he stripped it down to just in most pieces. Just a chord, either sustained or arpeggiated, and a melody, and a drum loop, let's say, or some sort of like percussive elements. And in some cases, there's not even a bass guitar or bass part present, and it's really again, like I always say. You know, the important question for me was like how conscious or conceptual were these decisions? And I have to say, like I can't imagine this not having been totally a conscious choice, trying to do something very different. And yeah, while I'm saying that you think that we think Tubular Bells 2 is a turning point. It is a turning point, and it's also sort of a blueprint. Parts of Tubular Bells 2 are a blueprint for this album and following albums in some way.
Actually, there was some, we were just discussing what, even though we spoke for 2 full hours about Tubular Bells 2, we both agreed that there was stuff which we thought was important, which we completely forgot about, nonetheless. And one of the things I think which we didn't touch on at all are the remixes, which Warner commissioned for the singles taken off that album. And I think they're important, not because they're so incredibly fantastic. I don't think so. Even though, like looking back, I think, man, why didn't they? They had the budget. Why didn't they commission a full remix album of Tubular Bells 2, like every single track? That would have been so interesting. But they didn't, but they had a few. And I was listening to these in conjunction with the Songs of Distant Earth and also what followed. And I think that Mike was listening to these quite intently, or had listened to these quite intently. There's several, and the most radical one is the one by the Orb, where it's just the sequence completely transformed and running like an acid line in the background, but it's quite I quite like that remix. And then there's one by a guy called Tommy Musto, I believe, and he's a really well-known remixer. Did a lot of great work in the 80s and 90s. Still remixes, and that remix is actually very faithful to the Sentinel single. And so it uses those elements and just brings it into a dance context. And if you listen to the passages of that remix where the melody is playing and you have sort of an acid line in the background which plays the bass and stuff, I think you have sort of the blueprint of what would become Tubular Bells 3, the opening to Tubular Bells 3. And it's very, very similar. So my impression is that he listened to that and he saw what you could do with the kind of material, the thematic material that he had, but in a way reduce it, simmer it down to something which is, as you said, far simpler in its structure and composition. I think in a way that opened the way to this album. On the other hand, I think I always remember there was a review of one of Gary Moore's album in the I think late 90s, where everyone was experimenting with samples because it was so hot at the time. And Gary Moore did one album where he also dabbled with electronics, and the review basically said, so it's almost cute how the production side of things wants to draw him into electronic music, but then he takes out his guitar, and once he strums a single note, he's back into blues territory and into rock territory. So he can't pretend like he's someone else. And to me, the songs of Distant Earth, despite it being simpler and despite it clearly referencing the trends of those times, and I think it's also very clearly a commercial product with it, like as you said, consciously designed in a way. I think nonetheless it's him. I think you can it is so much more musical and so much more intricate, and it actually manages to save a lot of the stuff that makes Mike into this project. Nonetheless, I think it's a really interesting album.
In that sense, Mike really is a truly progressive artist.
Yeah.
And so if we don't judge where he's progressing to, let's say, or to which form, and just his openness for exploration and experimentation, and that's what we mentioned about Tubular Bells too as well, is really what makes him who he is, what he did.
Yeah.
The course of his career, and going back to what you just said about the remixes or maybe the electronic dance music of the time. I guess you're right. I never thought about it. I guess you're right that he must have listened to that music, maybe, where it seems unlikely because, I'm sure you're right, but I'm saying, from my perspective, it seems unlikely because me, as somebody who's 20 years younger than Mike, that music to me wasn't really attractive at all. But maybe because he was a grown-up professional musician, in the sense that his heart, let's say, and also his mind must have been still open enough to be generally interested in what's happening in music, and so he let that influence his decisions, and that's, I think, again, that's in a way truly progressive. Yeah. Again, you may like it or you may not, but it's truly progressive. And remember that for a long time, I thought that there was no information around about Mike's musical tastes, let's say. There were only little tidbits of information that sometimes you mentioned Sibelius or, stuff like that. And later on, I found more articles on the internet where Mike was actually listing his top 10 albums and stuff like that. And there were really surprising things in there. There was also In the Court of the Crimson King, for example, which I find super interesting, and others. And so it is, I think it is probably absolutely true that he was just open to both forcefully, let's say, change himself. Remember the name of his book, right? So he made that sort of like an objective sort of to change and to have conceptual changes in how his music sounds and how it is approached, and also just the openness to listen to and to include sounds of the time, instruments of the time. That's what he's always done, sort of, right? And in a way, and this is like sort of something I was thinking about a lot, is that when instruments used to be the parts you could change out, then in the late 80s, at the latest really, sampling, as you say, so sampled instruments became something that was something that was available. So it was not just you playing another instrument, but you getting another sample set for your sampler, for your Akai sampler or whatever, Kurzweil, and also I remember that the early digital audio workstation software, some of those had like sample packs come along with it. And I remember that at the time, I think I was dabbling with, and I don't know now what it was, Cubase, or what is now Cubase. And there were like these sample set of voices in there, and some of which really sounded very much like the voices Mike used on this particular album, The Songs of Distant Earth. And so I don't know if any were actually the same, or because it says, like, it lists quite a few singers.
Yes. So, yeah, I think that sort of speaks of the same thing that the Gary Moore thing I was talking about suggests is, I think he was aware that sampling was the big thing and it was coming. And he did use sampling, but most of the stuff on this album is him sampling himself.
You mean literally, or?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, the drums, he describes this more in detail when speaking about Tres Lunas later on. So the drum loops on Tres Lunas are more upfront than they are here. They're super subtle, actually, on Sounds of Distant Earth. But the way that, so he said, okay, I wasn't entirely happy with the rhythms on the Sound of Distant Earth. So then, but the process he describes is the same. So he starts with a simple loop, then sends it to someone who will rework it. Then they send it hence and forth, and the other guys will sort of add to it with effect pedals and rhythm machines, and then it comes back, and then it's a loop, and then he just loop it. So he wanted to make use of the particular quality of looping something which doesn't change, which is clearly repeated verbatim, but he wanted to make it himself. I think it's almost, I had to think that there was a shamelessness in the early 90s with regards to sampling. The first two Deep Forest albums, the first two Enigma albums, they were shameless. That's what made them great. Because they used the quality of the recordings, which was baked into the samples, and Mike doesn't do that. And that's, I think, in this case, it's to the detriment of the music in a way, because his beats don't sound as great as the other guys, but the other guys are just shameless. They're just using what other people before them spent, or maybe a lifetime or like really long time to get that good. There's very little verbatim sampling. There's the Led Zeppelin drum break. Then there is a few vocals from one or two sampling CDs, and there's a Prince sample, but tucked away into Tubular World. It's not even musical really. It's just I think a vocal extra. But that's it. There's not a lot on there. I think he was very, he had sort of a mission statement, make music which can sort of fit into that mold, but he made it his own nonetheless. He just refused to go the easy route. So in a way, as some of the team from Tubular Bells too is still involved here, also some of that extra process, let's say, that Trevor Horn's team brought in kind of carries over into this. Yes, I think so.
Work. Yeah, for sure.
I think that's someone who would also work that way. There's actually, I mean, the people who are on there
let me just say something before. Yep. So we're talking about the loops. Remember that I pointed out. We were talking about, like, are there any fade outs in Mike's music? Yeah. Are there any loops in his earlier work? And we were talking about the ending of Omadon, the drum loop, which we don't know if it's a loop or if it's actually played like that. Could be a loop. And it fades out. And then what I think is like really the first loop that I'm hearing is Punkadiddle. I remember Punkadiddle on Platinum has sounds like it's a drum loop.
Yeah.
And also, and that's what I find interesting also in terms of like the concept of the composition, Punkadiddle maybe is very close to something like to the tracks on the Songs of Distant Earth. You just have a chord and you have a melody. And the chord is not played as a polyphonic part, but it's just strummed in the case of Punkadiddle, right? And I found that like funny to realize that, okay, this compositional style is not entirely new for him, but it was something that he was rarely doing.
Yes, I mean, that is definitely disco started this way of working.
That is true. That is true.
So it makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, during the disco days, drummers were actually playing in a way that today, when we look back, we would say, okay, they're playing metronomically, almost like a drum machine.
Yeah, but that has always been the case. That
Sure.
the drumming world, and also like nowadays with guitars, is very much so that people learn how to reproduce produced music.
Yeah.
And so it's not the way that a drummer would have played. And I mean, I'm sorry that I'm breaking my thought process myself here, but going back to that Led Zeppelin, that sample that a lot of people use back in that day, right? It to me, it's really. I mean, I don't want to say. It's not that I don't like it, but there's something really, really, really cheap me about. Actually, I think that sample sounds really good the way that Mike used it. It's sonically, it's really, really good, and the groove is cool, and it's also wacky, to have the bagpipes with that drum groove, and it's cool. But there's something really, I don't know. Let's say not very timeless at all about that, and it's funny because, like, you could say conceptually, this album would make for a great timeless record, but it's actually the opposite. And I remember that a friend of mine, I gave this record to a friend of mine at the time, and he was appalled because for him, the argument was, he didn't say anything about the music being bad or anything, but that the music did not fit the mood of the book for him.
I agree.
He thought it really does not reflect anything about the book, really, other than the titles.
I agree. I would 100%. I think that's something we can talk about, or we have to talk about, is the relationship between the music and the book. But I would say that the music almost provides what the book doesn't have, which is the emotive and the emotional side. Because Clark, I'm really in awe at the ideas behind the book, and I could talk about those for hours. And I think it's genius. I think actually the story he sets up is genius in the way he does it, and is so relevant. And it's still today. I think it's completely up. Like it contributes to the current debate on many topics. But Clark he's so scientific in his writing, and there's a love story at the heart of this book, which is also important. And the way he writes about love is almost comical. You know how there are these books in magazine stores at railway stations, written specifically for a particular female audience in mind, like a doctor or a surgeon falling in love with a nurse and stuff that. So that is specific for a target, like for females, and it's like him doing the exact opposite, like writing for people, completely unromantic people. Although I think that Clark, actually, there's different parts where I think he's a romantic, but he can't bring it, like he can't express it in his writing. And I think the music is that. It brings out what the writing can't.
Interesting, but now you've given me an interesting thought, and I never thought about it this way. Well, we know that Mike always had humor in his music, and things were not really as serious, or you had something very serious paired up with something lighter. And I have never thought about it this way. This album maybe even has something comical about it for me now that I think about it. Like maybe the things that are sort of alienating to me, or like I say, it's a weird, wacky combination of things.
Yes.
Could actually be a sort of humor.
You know, there's I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a clip from when he's on German late night TV doing promo for this particular album with Thomas Gottschalk, who's Germany's most famous TV presenter at the time. And he comes in and they drink champagne, and they actually drink champagne. It's like he pours him a glass, and they actually drink, and it's really, this is a really good mood between the two, and it's actually a decent interview. It's not particularly deep or anything, but they're having a good time.
And was Mike saying anything about the music?
Yeah, he said he spent quite a lot of time on it. And they also go into this idea of instrumental music versus vocal music, which is interesting because until Man on the Rocks and a few tracks here and there, he's back into writing instrumental music.
Yes.
Which he feels more comfortable in. He says it's just his way of expressing himself, which so to me, I think you may be right. I mean, I'm not sure if it's like laughing kind of humor, but there is something like that you mentioned, like the bagpipe thing, and so that is definitely over the top. I like it, but it's very like it's bagpipes in space.
Yeah, and not only that, like. Remember that people still call him like also even like the godfather of world music sometimes, which I guess referring to Omadon.
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, like this album really is drawing from all sorts of different cultures in terms of the vocals and even the musical inspiration. You have something that's like a Gregorian chant. You have whatever Polynesian singing. You have like Northern Norwegian things.
And there's a classical soprano or it's a boy's voice actually, I think.
Yeah, and lots of different things that sort of are. It's sort of a melting pot kind of, which sort of, again, like I don't know what it must have felt like at the time for those guys to do it. You also mentioned, what is it, Deep Forest? And Nico too. And there are many other examples from that time that did this kind of mashup.
Yes.
Right? But this mashup is really, really, really strange.
It is just everything. He just doesn't go and I mean he looking back, he said several times he likes the album and he re-listened to it a year or two afterwards, and he said I was actually moved by it. He says of himself, but he says it's so technically he wasn't happy with how it turned out, which I think I may have an idea of what he's referring to. But he said I like the album. I think it's a good one.
Yes. Yeah, it's at that time producing music like this wasn't as easy as it appears now.
No, yeah,
and especially with there are still plenty of layers and really interesting sonic things that happen. It's just that some of the sounds that are so specific, or they sort of always draw the attention, and they draw my attention, I have to say.
Yeah.
Like, and again, like everything I'm saying, and I say it again, it not a criticism at all, and it's just amazing how versatile he was as a musician, as a conceptualist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think then that sampling really is the technology of the 90s. And I just find it fascinating that you have sort of two extremes in terms of artists who use that technology. You have, on the one hand, Klaus Schulze. When sampling becomes available, he gets onto it like a madman. And he takes these sampling CDs and builds these endless rhythm chains. When you have, I don't know, maybe loops which extend over minutes, and every hit is a different one. There's no repetition, and he blasts you away with one sample after another. But that's him. That's completely unique. And on the other hand, you have someone like Mike who works with sampling, but he samples himself and musicians he's working with. Actually, the Gregorian chant, that's actually people he recorded. So it's not a sample.
Yes.
And the beat, which is sort of an attempt to replicate the Enigma beat on Sadness or Sadness, that's a program beat which they made. So it's super.
It's also like a variation of the Amen break, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of beats were at that time, even Smells Like Teen Spirit. You know.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I'm remembering a few particular things about like the piece. That's called Supernova, or the theme, because it appears a couple times. It's something he, in one of his interviews, he plays. I think it was a promo interview. He plays that on the piano, like solo on the piano, and it's just like really simple, super simple.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely beautiful, you know. Like the funny thing is that always when we're talking about these albums, we're talking about the form that they found for the recording, but we don't necessarily know how they were written. And it's fascinating to hear these piano versions, and just remembering like what's called piano improvisation on the deluxe version of Platinum, or no, of Incantations. I don't even know right now. But where you have the themes for Platinum, you know, in a piano improvisation, and we see here, okay, so these pieces for some reason he must have really just also sat down and played, you know. This is something like with an album that has a lot of sequencing and sampling, we're not aware anymore that it's actually has been played at some point, and that may actually be the difference between Mike making an album like this and, say, Deep Forest making an album like that. You know, the way they did.
Absolutely.
Not saying that they can't play.
No, Deep Forest is actually really good.
Yes. But that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's just that with Mike, it seems to be more the mode actually that he comes up with the ideas, like either in his head or with an instrument in hand. Could be the guitar or a keyboard, you know. And then, as he said, like he would scribble something down so that he doesn't forget. And I find that interesting, just in you know, having these very stripped down arrangements here, where an important feature is that there's always what I would call, and I know that's not how jazz people use this terminology, but I would call it like a chord melody. So what I mean is that the harmonic progression in itself is the melody. And in some cases, he puts other melodies or just short phrases, melodic phrases, on top of these moving progressions. And the progression actually is that first layer, let's say, of emotional melodicism, let's say.
Yeah.
Like, so it is. I've always found that to be super interesting, I have to say. And with this album, it's just so pronounced. He was doing that kind of stuff before, but really here, you just have a string pad, let's say, and it's changing like one note at a time. Like these voicings are really smooth, going from one chord to the next, and it just draws you in. And you wouldn't even need any additional melody.
Yeah, I agree. There's quite a few of those on this album.
Yes, exactly.
I think because you can ask yourself why this album sold so much less than some of the others we've hinted on. And I think it's because he doesn't just leave it there. You know, he doesn't leave it with a chordal melody. He does go deeper, and he does add something. So in a way, I think the album might have sold more if there had been no guitar on it. Like if he had removed the guitar melodies, then maybe that album would have made it more palatable to more people. It would have made it easier to sync these tracks to compilations.
Yeah, sure.
There were whole acts in the 90s who became rich, filthy rich, just by writing for compilations. They sold basically no albums, but they had a few pieces which landed on hundreds of all these chill out and downbeat compilations. And also, I think in a way, the timeline many people have of this album is incorrect. So yes, it is sort of, it taps into a certain style which was very popular, but it hadn't been in mainstream culture for that long. Actually, the first Enigma album is 1989, 1990. Then you have Papua New Guinea, which was a huge track by Future Sound of London in 1981. In 1992, you have the Vangelis soundtrack, which had a few of those elements as well. Then in 1993, the second Enigma album. And the first Deep Forest one, I think, was 1991 as well. So this is 1994, but quite a few of the big ones actually came much later. So like if we count something like Moby's Play, which I mentioned last time, or Schiller's Zeitgeist, which was massive in Germany, those came 5 years later. And he just, I think, if he had stuck with it, maybe he could have jumped on that wagon, or maybe if he had toured it and maybe presented it live in a different way, like Schiller. That's a project which really became big because he toured it with a superb band who just made that material their own. I think this could have also gone bigger. Not that it sold badly. It apparently sold almost 1 million, but still, like the second Deep Forest album, which came out a year later, sold 4 million. So they outsold him by a factor of 5 or 6.
Yeah. I mean, I don't like, if you think about it, if it has sold 750,000, like it says on Wikipedia, that is just, for me, it's a huge number.
It's still a lot,
If you think about the cultural impact, that's what counts really, right? So like two completely different things come to mind for me now. I'm going to say so Only Time Will Tell is sort of that track that illustrates that where the chord progression is the melody, and it uses this beautiful trick of having a pedal point note that runs through the whole piece. It starts actually before the piece and ends after the piece, and that pedal note. And I remember this was funny. My girlfriend at the time, we listened to that album, and then at some point she looked at me and she said, "Hey, that note is always the same," because she was hearing that as a melody, as a change relatively to the chord sequence. So exactly pointing out like what I said. So it's really cool where you're creating sort of different envelopes for the same note. You put the notes into different envelopes, and the note starts to change. And anyway, like that is sort of like a really cool feature, something that he did on this album, only in this track, as far as I remember now. But we need to never forget that at this time in music, we have thunderstorms outside now. At this time, the music tastes had already split into two very distinct camps. So there was like more of the camp that I think you were in, because like your references are about a certain style of music, right? Which is more of the sampling and electronic. But you had also grunge, what people called grunge back then, right? Which started a completely like an opposite kind of movement. And why do I say this? Because Mike clearly was on your side, right? Let's say and he has never really made the connection with or reconnection with the rock music.
That's
which I find, like even though we did, like we also said that there's the Outcast track, Tubular Bells 3, which is rock music, but it's not the kind of rock music that was popular at the time. And so there was a clear choice or a taste choice made for mostly European music, which is, like, remember we said that Tubular Bells 2 has sort of like Americanized versions.
Yeah.
Like I say, using the banjo, the Americana sound, dobro, whatever, also with the titles, with Maya and, stuff like that. And now here with this album, it seems like he has made a clear cut again. Like there's no, not entirely, but there's like no South American rhythm on this. No. There's not a single American instrument really featured prominently here.
Yeah.
So it's really he's back to using the European thing, also the European dance music or European electronic music, drawing from the territories where he was most successful. So in a way, we could say again, like probably a conscious decision, but also just a decision of cultural like heritage. So where did he feel like he belonged? Maybe.
Yeah.
And very clearly, like as we always say, we also need to look at what comes after the Voyage album, which is even more so him like going to his roots somehow and more going from like a European influence to sort of a local influence.
Yeah.
And
well, the way I understand it, most of the time he was working in the States on this album, and as you mentioned, many of the people of the team who worked on Tubular Bells 2 were present, and then there were a few he invited. Those were people who had worked with people like Mark Almond, or probably as part of Trevor's projects. And one of them worked with Goldie, actually, UK drum and bass artist. So there was a UK connection. So it was an international production, especially if you count in the Sami chant and all these international influences coming in through sampling. But
was it really recorded in the US? I don't think so.
It doesn't really say.
No.
But the thing is, he moved back to Europe afterwards. So after this album, he relocates to Ibiza, and he actually has a house built.
But this album was for sure recorded in the UK.
Let me let this have a look, because in Changeling he explicitly says he was in the States.
No, I believe you too, but I'm just saying that what I remember is that it was the Denim, right? Is that the name of the place or the studio?
It doesn't say, actually. That's what I mean. It doesn't really.
Yeah.
Let's have a look in Changeling.
Yeah. Anyway, it also isn't that important, but
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, and that it's not doesn't have the American connotation, and it's very. I agree. It's probably a European kind of music in its like particular way of meshing all these influences. And yes, Enigma was German, Deep Forest was French, Papua New Guinea, Future Son of London was British.
Yes.
So maybe he was indeed drawn back in a way.
Arthur C. Clarke was, I excuse my ignorance, was he British or?
He's British, and he lived in I think Singapore at the time, right? No, Sri Lanka. Sorry, he lived in Sri Lanka.
It's totally fascinating. This phase in music history generally.
Yeah.
And this album is. I think that Mike Oldfield's influence can't be underestimated or shouldn't be underestimated. Also on other musicians. I know that not a lot of famous musicians talk about Mike's music.
Yep.
So like sometimes there are just other ways that we find out that people actually reference or used to listen to Mike's music, and obviously, because if you think about people that are like niche, famous artists, but in niches, like in jazz or experimental music, let's say, there's no way that that have not been influenced by the huge successes that Mike had. So everybody must have heard at least Tubular Bells, and you know, and also just change the image of what an artist could actually be, you know, like a producer, and you know, you could be you could be making your own choices rather than being entirely driven by the music business itself. I think all of these things played a role. And I know that there is a wonderful singer called Petra Hayden. Mm-hmm. She's the daughter of Charlie Hayden, who was one of the greatest jazz bassists who ever lived, right?
Yeah.
And she has a cover of, and now I think it was the Shining Ones, a piece from this record, from the Songs of Distant Earth, like a pure a cappella version of a Mike Oldfield track from this particular album. So what does that tell me? That within their household, they must have had this album. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say anything what Charlie thought of it, or if Charlie was a fan or whatever. Yeah. But we can see there are there must be some sort of like interconnectedness that we're just not aware of. And as we know, it wasn't fashionable for a long time, or maybe still isn't fashionable to like Mike Oldfield, or to and I found that funny or beautiful even to find her version of this piece, which I couldn't find online anymore, unfortunately. It was on her SoundCloud account for a while.
It's almost like he's a category unto himself. It's when I do interviews with like for 15 questions, I often get people telling me, yes, well, I got into music by listening to what my parents would play on their turntable, which was Tangerine Dream, Mike Oldfield, and so forth and so forth. So it's not even relevant so much which album. It's like Mike Oldfield. Yeah. It's what he stands for as a musician. Yes. And it's remarkable how many people name the Songs of Distant Earth as their favorite Mike Oldfield album, or was it the top 3? That's a lot, actually. And I remember quite distinctly that at the time this was out at my school, this was a big thing. This album was really popular. And actually, I think I said this last time, a friend of mine who now also lives in Berlin, who is aware of the podcast, he told me, okay, most of it isn't for me, but let me know when you get to the Songs of Distant Earth and tell me when that episode is out. Because that's the album he's interested in.
Yeah. Yeah, for me also, that was sort of the time when I had just discovered, I was already studying with Robert Fripp. Mm-hmm. And so my musical interests, let's say, they were going into a different direction. And then being, sort of like surprised by this record. I remember that I was in my very first apartment that I had in Bielefeld when I was studying psychology there. So this, in 94, obviously. And I listened to this a lot. Yeah. Listened to this album a lot. Like all day for weeks or months, which is funny because now it feels like I'm more distant to it than it was more important or more moving, or I was more involved in it than I remember. Yeah, like if I just look at the facts of how much time I spent with it. Yeah, right.
It's similar for me. I feel like I've lost a bit of my emotional connection to it. On the other hand, I think the more I listen to it today, the more I see that I admire lots of things about it. I think you mentioned the pedal point. I think every single segment of this album has something which makes it unique and recognizable. Yeah. And that is so remarkable for this kind of music, where you often have artists who will have one particular sound, and they'll stretch that one particular sound or idea across an album, or maybe 2 or 3 or entire careers. And there's something in every single piece here. And I think especially some of this, like the shorter pieces, the Sunken Forest, or You mentioned the
Shining.
Shining ones.
Yeah.
Those are really, really excellent, where the rhythm cools off and it's actually more textural. And I think those are fantastic. And they each have the unique mood and
Yeah, and I mean, again, the track Ascension
yeah.
is a classic Oldfield piece in the sense that he draws together the themes of the albums, and it's like it's the idea of the finale, but different in a different way now, where he again brings the two main themes back. So the Let There Be Light theme is at the end of it, and I mean all the themes are interrelated on this album as well, so I can't really make clear cuts here, but just last year, a student and friend of mine made a record called Ascension, which has a cover of the track Ascension on it, and it was just fascinating because I was helping him with the production of that album. It was fascinating to see how genius that composition is, and again how emotionally clever. I used that for Tubular Bells too, when we talked about the beginning of it. Emotionally clever this music is.
Yeah.
And again, Mike does something that he had not done really before, the sort of suspension, kind of suspension that only really is possible when you have a more simplified arrangement or a less dense arrangement.
Yeah.
And you can go into this total suspension, literally with suspended cymbals. Yeah. And then you kind of like fall back into like a sort of emotional release that Mike has always been great at, but this is now like a really it's a new way or a new form that he kind of like poured his heart into.
And especially that track is also super creative, because that is actually something which is conceptual in nature as well, and only possible now in the digital medium, because when he goes back to Only Time Will Tell, it's right at the beginning. When he goes back to that, he doesn't actually just go back to the theme. He actually quotes it verbatim. So it's actually a sample. So it's almost like he goes back to that track. The track reappears. So that means the album is cyclical, and then he can really make a new beginning. So he actually really closes it off. So I think what he's saying is, I mean, the story is essentially about finding a new home for humanity. And I think there's there's a message in there which means it's, you end with the ending is also the beginning, but you have to close it off in the same way, and then you go to the new beginning. I think I like the fact that he's quoting it literally. That is so cool. I think that's, rather than, because there are a few instances where he remixes himself. You know, where you have Let There Be Light, and then there's, I think, First Landing or Oceania. That's where he's actually remixing the track. But here he's just inserting it back again.
I don't know if that's true in a literal sense, but I know what you mean. Also, like there's the Crystal Clear track, which again combines like these themes, like, and the Let There Be Light theme, and also the idea of that chord melody thing, and I mean, what is sort of like still mysterious to me about this album is, whereas I think if I would concentrate, I could play the whole record through in my head, like I can with most Mike's albums, right? I can hear every single detail. I can, with this album, the sequence is with sequence, I mean the order of how parts appear is slightly still more mysterious. There is less. I don't want to use the word random, because it's not. But these pieces are more universally interchangeable in terms of the overall form of the album.
Yeah, it's funny. I've thought about that too. I think, to me, So in an interview, he said the breaks between tracks are not entirely random, but they are not necessary.
Yeah.
So he said it's 17 tracks, it's 15 sections, he said, those 15 musical sections.
Yeah.
I think the way this one, because with Tubular Bells 2, I noticed really that if you listen to it on vinyl, I feel like it flows more and I forget about the breaks.
Yeah.
In this one, I think there are a few pieces on there which really, to me, reinforce the idea that at least until track 9, where the first side on the vinyl version of this, which had only been released in a small print run initially, ends. I think that is really a cycle. That is completely, that you have a lot of, it's very dense thematically. I actually think of Hergest Ridge in a way. It's like Hergest Ridge in space, in its density and its the reduction to a small amount of material. But there's the track Magellan.
Yeah.
That one, to me, that is a piece which only works if you think about the first 9 as a longest sequence. To me, because the way it's constructed, that doesn't think of, like, if you put it separately, it starts off with the climax, and then it's like an inverse climax. It continually gets less dense, more quiet, more intimate, and then it seems to build up again, but it doesn't actually go full climax again. So that's something which, to me, the whole album is a lot about transitions.
Yes.
But that one particularly. So I think of the first 9 as sort of the A side and it's one piece. And on the second one, as you said, I also think it's more random. And I also can't quite see how it relates to the story anymore. The first 9 have a very clear path. They sort of mirror the storyline. But then the Sunken Forest comes too late, I feel. And so for what's it called, the Lament for Atlantis?
Yeah.
That is actually the end, almost at the end of the book. But it comes too early in a way. So I'm not on the second side, something it's more personal, maybe more inspired by the book than a soundtrack to the book. The second side is completely, but that's why I like the second side as well, because it has more space, more surprises.
Yeah, and just a funny association I'm now getting, like imagining these tracks in my head. I mean, I did listen to the album just the other day, but now it's more obvious to me again that even some of the techniques, let's say, that he used on an album that's very different, which is Incantations. Incantations is a totally serious record, let's say. He is using this kind of floaty arpeggios, layering technique here as well. Like the mood is completely different because the harmonic material is very different he's using here. So he's like mostly super simple. And either like major and minor keys are separate here. Like within the development of one idea, you either have the one sound or the one mood or the other in another tune, but not within the same. And that is.
Did you see him on the 1999 tour?
Yes, I did.
Because on the 1999 tour, he opened with Songs of Dissonance.
Yes.
And
which was a big surprise.
I mean, I actually, even now, I thought, wow, that's interesting.
Yes.
And kind of courageous.
Yeah.
Because it's really intimate and he's not going for the big effect, but he's going for something deeper. And it's almost identical to the album version, but he plays his solos differently. And in the solos, there are actually hints of the Incantations sequences. I like that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Otherwise, he leaves the pieces as they are. But I think to me, the way he solos on those live tracks of live versions, it would seem that he's actually holding back here consciously and trying to, for him, bring it down to the simplest, the purest version of the idea.
Yes. Yes. And that's for sure the concept of this album is to to this sort of reductionist idea. But at the same time, again, like if you then pay attention to all the details that are there,
suddenly,
there's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot, and I hardly ever get like visual, images when I think about music. But right now, I just had this. It's more an idea. It's a little bit like looking into an aquarium, like a fish tank. This album, to me, it's a bit like you have these fish of different colors, and you have the plants, right? Underwater plants, and a little bit like this is sort of like the impression that so rather than space as like expansive,
yes,
for me it is like he's allowing us to look into a particular part of a world. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, it makes sense in
you,
the context of the book as well. I mean, what's the world where the story takes place is a water world. So,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that also explains the manta ray. Even though there's no manta ray in the book, it's actually sort of a scorpion. There's sort of scorpion-like creatures, which may or may not be the beginning of intelligent life, like a second form of intelligent life on that planet. Yeah, the planet is covered in water. There's only small strips of land and islands where humans live.
Yeah, I mean, like the cover is at least the back cover here.
Yeah, this is the original cover.
Water. Yeah, we have the original cover here.
Yeah,
with this really long, whatever, how many 20-page Leporello.
Yeah, I think it's the best book.
It's 16 pages. Yeah.
And by the way, talking about the different contributions in that, as like let's call it a collaboration, even though I'm very reticent to call it a collaboration between Clarke and Mike. There's liner notes by Arthur Clarke, which are very, very interesting and detailed. You said 16 pages, but I think it's 2 or 3 of those.
16 panels, yeah.
Yeah, and then 3, I think, are really by Arthur C. Clarke, and it's really dense, and it's really interesting. It's not just anything. And how many words did Mike contribute? 0. Like he wrote nothing. And in the interviews he did, which are also really, like he did a few interviews, and they're interesting. He did one for Sound on Sound, which is probably the one which has been most quoted, about the technical aspects of the production. Really interesting, really clear that he spent a lot of time on that part. But they never actually talk about the story. Yeah, I think the Leporello is mainly composed of the images from the virtual reality film. Folding it back together is actually quite a task. I spent some time on that myself yesterday.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this really is very much an album where, at least for me, it's really difficult to talk about it. Yeah, I don't know how to put it, but there is something about it that is even more spiritual.
Yes, and I think it's in your face spiritual very often, actually in a good way, but it's very explicit in the chanting, and the way the like the titles, Ascension, A New Beginning, and then right at the beginning, Let There Be Light. There's lots of references. And again, interestingly, like if we're talking about the connection between the book and the music, in the book, religion has been abolished. It's been deemed irrelevant and a mistake. So there's no religion anymore in the book. And there's plenty of spirituality and maybe even religion in the music.
Yeah, I'm also fascinated, and I remember I was fascinated at the time, like that some of these pieces are really just sort of vignettes, like short pieces, like 1 minute and 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And that's why actually you were mentioning people writing cues for TV, like library music and stuff like that. And you're absolutely right. I haven't thought about it that way. Like there is an aspect of this album that really speaks to that genre,
Yeah.
library music, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but in a way, remember like when we were talking about Earth Moving and we realized, okay, maybe this is sort of like an experiment where he's looking at like, can he produce other singers, or so he's figuring things out. And this could be, and now I totally get what you said before, like if we, scratch the guitar parts on this record, it would be a perfect library music record. Yeah, I get that now. I see what you meant there.
I think maybe together with Warner, they were building towards something or building something, and it didn't quite work out the way they wanted it to work out. But you said something really interesting about the titles, and you mentioned that the titles of Tubular Bells too had a sort of a space theme to them, which was a transition to this one. But I think it actually runs deeper, because Arthur C. Clarke and Kubrick worked together in 2001. Which most people don't even know that that 2001 isn't actually a filmization of a novel. No, actually the novel, the book, and the movie were written at the same time, and they collaborated on both. So Kubrick is a co-author on the book, and Clarke is a co-author on the script. And 2001 was built on a short story that Clarke had written many years before they started working together, and that story was called The Sentinel. So, and also Mike, I'm pretty sure you know this this quote in anticipate, like in the promo campaign. He said, "Yes, the Songs of Distant Earth. It had a musical title which made it easy to relate to it. I don't think it's Clarke's best, but it had a good atmosphere."
Yes.
So what does that quote tell us? It's not his best. Well, it means he's clearly read more of them.
Yeah.
But the suggestion of this particular novel came to him from Clive Bell, right? I keep forgetting the name of.
Yeah. Or maybe the was it maybe Rob Dickens?
It was definitely suggested to him.
Yes.
So it didn't come from him, but it was suggested to him. So I think they must have had sort of.
Clive Banks.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they must have talked about this, and they must have both been interested in Clarke's work, and the sci-fi thing clearly meshed well with the spirit of the time, where you now had these videos running in late night, like really late night TV, the Space Night, and this electronic music being as a background. He himself had the space movie thing done before.
Yes.
So I think they were working on something in this direction, and so I see it as part of a collaboration, and it didn't quite yield the results. I mean, I don't care about how many copies it sold, but Mike did. So he mentioned that, like, he writes almost nothing about the album in the book, but he mentions that they were disappointed by the sales, and he actually says, "I don't know why it didn't sell better."
I think you're absolutely right. We sometimes forget about the bigger picture also. So since this Clive Banks guy was his new manager at the time, right? And maybe they did have an idea like, well, let's see if we can make an album where people will do, like license it, sync licensing, and things like that. It's a very, very interesting thought there. I think that something like that may actually have been part of this. Whatever plan, yes. That may not necessarily just have been Mike's plan, but like the idea, okay, let's see how we can, the word exploit your catalog or your skill set, and let's see, make an album that has shorter tracks, that has sort of like a world music and space vibe. And we know that a lot of people are making documentaries nowadays, and maybe we can use your music for this. Remember that in the 70s, people used to do that. They, took your music, used it for documentaries. Now let's create something that maybe suggests itself to that. And very, very, very good point. And that also explains a lot about some of the choices here for the instrumentation, for the like it's sort of like wacky combinations, and also the
videos look exactly the two promo videos they did look exactly like the kind of stuff you would see on Chill Out Zone on MTV, which went on at like 2 or like midnight or 2 o'clock in the morning, which I sometimes watched when I came home back then. I think in a way the problem of this time is that he's sort of surrendering part of the creative control to others consciously, but then it works against him. In 1995, he does a few interviews where he says, if I'm honest, I'm not really interested in music anymore, like pure music. I'm really interested in the video album idea, virtual reality. Funnily enough, in the book, there is the Lament for Atlantis is sort of at the end is a concert given for the visitors from now destroyed Earth who make sort of a transitory stop on that planet, and then they send them off with a concert, and it says explicitly by Clark, and there was no videos. There was no disturbing videos. It was just music.
Yeah.
But Mike, funnily enough, was interested in precisely that. And he actually said that Molly Oldfield, who is on the album, like her role is, I think she hits the keyboard note or somewhere on the album. But he says, I had Molly on the album as a producer. She would tell me, use this, that's good, discard that. And I think in Tubular Bells 2, now coming back, I had to think about some of the stuff like the bell. And so many people saying, shouldn't it have been longer? And I said, yeah, well, maybe you don't have to. I always thought the transition between the track before that and the bell is kind of abrupt. Maybe this idea of splitting into 2 tracks, maybe it did change the compositions as well. And I think the reason he didn't tour is because he didn't think it was interesting to present this material live.
Yeah.
So he was sort of maneuvering himself into a situation where the music wasn't interesting anymore to present live, but live had always been sort of a love and hate relationship, a place where you could really change the music up and come up with new ideas, and that was now gone.
But this was already 10 years after he had last toured.
Yeah, that's true. So it's not like he couldn't come up with great ideas in the studio, but somehow I feel like in the next album, Voyager, that again was suggested to him. It wasn't his idea. He actually said that it was an idea again presented to him, and so I think he surrendered a lot of control.
I mean, he was just 40, 41, right?
Yeah, he just turned 40, 92. Yeah.
Yeah. 93.
I thought he was born in 52.
53.
Okay, you know this better than I.
Yeah.
But
anyway, like what is interesting to me always, because like some sort of reference I use for phases in life, let's say, is like the 7-year cycle. So, and really, it seems to me that, and because it also happened to me, so I don't know if it's a general thing, but at the age of 42, I felt like I had sort of used up all my childhood energies, let's say, and sort of like a new phase of life was starting. And this was exactly this point really at Mike's age that maybe he just really wasn't really that interested anymore. He had sort of said what he wanted to say, and he had to reinvent himself somehow. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No.
And we're so lucky that he kept going for so much longer.
Do you think he was being honest in his releases?
Yeah.
But that would make sense if you look at Voyager as a sort of looking back album, like to the roots. And then you have something like the Millennium Bell, which is a mash of lots of different ideas from his past, and Translunars, which is building on this one. So yeah, maybe it was definitely the time of reinvention. That ended in a way with this album until Man on the Rocks, which is definitely different again.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what was is there a tubular world in the book?
No, there's not. The hibernaculum is mentioned by word once in the
Yeah.
entire novel. Like the Hibernaculum is just a sleep chamber.
Yeah.
But I thought about it. But the Shining ones, I don't think the Shining ones are part of the book either.
Yeah, I'm just trying to go through these pieces in my head now and try to identify relationships to other pieces of his in his catalog.
And definitely there's a few Tubular Bell references strewn like
Yeah,
across
as
the field.
always. And that was like at this point, like for me also. And even though like Tubular World is a nice track within itself, but as you know, something that really sort of follows the same formula as Tubular Bells 2 did, or Sentinel did in a way. Wasn't really that satisfying for me at the time. But anyway, yeah, Let There Be Light, just that pentatonic descending line, which is something he's done a few times before, and I remember that it is sort of a present. It's like very close to this melody is in Amarok, which I think I pointed out in the Amarok podcast. And Supernova really is sort of similar to the Wind Chimes Part 1 kind of harmonies.
I actually think the beginning of Supernova, where the harmonic idea is suggested by little dots of notes, that is so amazing. I think that's one of maybe the greatest moment on there, where he this mosaic of prisons. That's great.
Yes, and I think that's also like what is special about this album is sort of like the arrangement of the ideas. Let's say so there seems to be like an arrangement before the musical arrangement. I don't know how to explain that. There again like little conceptual things that he's applied to much simpler material than he had done before. He was working with more complex material, also applying these techniques. Here's applying those techniques to simpler musical material, and the result is, as you say, it's more subtle, and it's also like more obvious. You know, if you think about these things, it's more obvious, but also just more pure. Even.
The focus is somewhere else. I think, for example, you said about references to other pieces. One technique which he uses here, which is really very, like if you listen by headphones, it's very apparent. On his previous albums, he would have, like on the left and right channel, you would have the same thing played, sometimes even by the same instrument in a slightly different way. Like the same pattern, but played just slightly different, which creates a sort of a richness and keeps the brain busy. And he does it on this album with the rhythms. So if you listen on headphones, you will see that there is no rhythm in the center channel.
Yes.
It's all on the left or all on the right.
It's panned,
It's always panned.
Yeah,
There's very few exceptions.
Yeah. That's something that he has always done, that he worked with in the production, that he used the panning as part of the composition.
Yeah. But it's with rhythm here, which I find is...
With the drum loops,
With drum loops.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's...
It's something that dance artists would never have done.
Exactly. They would
Because in the
go
club, you need to have it in the middle.
Yeah.
Yes.
So many of the dance tunes of that time were still mixed in mono, because it was more powerful. But he does the exact opposite. So he splits the rhythm into two channels. But that's something that really is, to me, that's so typical of him. It was like anyone who would do that was thinking conceptually, like Tara Tamlets. There's an album which he did where he arranges dance music, like a house club, as though it's chamber music. So he places the bass in the left, or like jazz, maybe like in the left corner, and then the drums in the right corner. So it's completely, it loses all power.
Disjointed.
Yeah, disjointed. And but in this case, it's super subtle, and I think that's also like unique.
Yes. Okay. Do you have more to say?
I wonder if it makes sense now at the end of this to talk about the story. Maybe we can leave that for sort of another time. I think I can just say that I think the story is super inspiring. and I have a lot to say about it, and maybe we can do that in another episode. It's not really relevant.
As you say, the story has nothing to do with the album, or not much.
I think really that he says I went all the way to Sri Lanka to talk to Clark, and they talked about it, and in the booklet, but actually in the booklet, Clark, I think, actually implicitly says that there was no collaboration. I think he says, Mike came to me, we talked, he handed me a copy of Tubular Bells 2, which I like, and now he's made an album about the songs of Distant Earth. Thank you. So I'm not quite sure what they talked about when in Sri Lanka. I don't think it had a direct influence on the music.
Yeah. I mean, it really, in many ways, it's sort of a traditional, transitional album also still, that some of the people he's worked with in the 80s and 70s are still around, interestingly enough. Like Tom Newman is, again, listed as an engineer here, which I find really, really strange, interesting. I would really love to know what Tom remembers about doing on this record,
Yeah.
Well,
for Tubular Bells 2, I think he was mainly busy drawing mandalas on the floor. I'm exaggerating. No, it's. I mean, maybe the album had sort of in terms of engineering, there's maybe a lot more traditional work still being done here than one might think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I said, at that time, creating this sort of product, let's say, was a really tedious affair.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, like Jeremy Parker is still listed here. Yeah, I find it like really, the kind of album that, again, like if this is the first album you hear of Mike's, you get absolutely lost in it and drawn in and emotionally molded somehow.
Yeah. And I can totally imagine that there were people in the 90s when this whole downbeat thing was coming who thought, now, if only someone would use those pieces as a starting point rather than the end goal.
Yeah.
Because the grooves were fantastic, the production was fantastic, but mostly that was it. You would have just loops looping themselves, which can be used in the background. Now, if only someone would come and create something musical out of that, and I think this is it. I think if you're looking for something to go further, take you further, then he created that. So I think that maybe explains why there's a smaller, but still quite sizable group of people who love this album.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say, I love it too.
Yeah, I was, like you, I was totally infatuated with it.
Yeah. Okay, man. I think, yes, like maybe more things in some sort of bonus episodes at some point. But thank you for listening, and thanks for, we're really happy to see that we are gaining more and more listeners now with this. And so keep sharing the news with your friends. And anyway, thank you, and we're gonna hear you and see you again soon.